Let's start with the product detail screen, where we can tap on a product and we see more information about it, like for example its price and its description. Now obviously you might want to show the price here on the starting page as well. You could, for example, also go to your product item, and besides a footer there on the grid tile, you can also add a header so that you could have the title of the item up there and the price down there. These are all changes you can of course implement. I will simply also, for demo purposes, show some of the information here on the main screen and then some on the detail screen. You learned all the tools it takes to fine-tune this to your personal likings and requirements. So my goal now is that we can tap onto a grid tile here, and then we're taken to that detail screen. And for that, we need to add a new screen, of course, add a new file therefore, and that's the product underscore detail underscore screen.dart file, which will hold the stateless widget, which is the product detail screen widget. And therefore, of course, as always, we should import material Dart from the Flutter package up there. Now, since this widget here will in the end render a screen, so it will control the full page, I want to use a scaffold widget here to, well, add an app bar, add a background color. And here in the app bar, I of course want to render an app bar widget, and there I want to output a title with the name of the product. Now, we got two ways of managing this now, and that is now already getting closer to that state management idea. You learned in the section where we also focused on navigation and different screens and so on, that there are two important ways of going to a new screen. Here in the products overview screen, when we tap one of our product items there, or therefore here in product item where we can register such a tab, we can either use navigator push and then create a material page route on the fly and create the widget we want to go to on the fly and pass all the data we need to it in place, or we push a named route. Now let's start with pushing on the fly, so to say, which is relatively easy to implement in this app here. And for that, let's say whenever we tap on the image, we want to go to that new screen, we want to go to the details, and therefore we can wrap this here with a gesture detector. The image here is wrapped with this widget because that allows us to add on tap listener to this image. The image itself has no on tap argument, but we can easily add one by wrapping the invisible gesture detector widget around it. So on tap should now push this new page. And therefore here in this function which we define, in this anonymous function which we define for on tap, we can use navigator of context push. Not push named, but just push. And there you learned in the navigation section that you create a material page route, which is a widget built into Flutter, which takes a builder method, which gives you a new context object and which has to return the widget you want to go to. So here we might want to go to the product detail page, to the product detail screen. So for that, let's import the from the screens folder, the product detail screen. And now we have that widget available here. So here we can then create a product detail screen like this. Now this is one way of doing it. And when the product detail screen now requires data like the title, then we can simply expect the title here as a property and therefore as an argument in the constructor, where we then simply store it in the property, and then we can reference this title property here in our widgets. And that should of course be a text widget with the title as a content. So now we can use the title property here in this text widget as a title for the app bar, because we're getting the title in the constructor of the product detail screen, because when we push, we do it here on the fly in the place where the user tapped on something, like in this case here on the image. And here, since we're in the product item widget, we already know the title of the product, and we can now forward this here as an argument to the product detail screen. And with this approach, if we do that, now we can tap on these images and we load these different screens with the correct title in the app bar, as you can tell. Now, this approach has some benefits. It's relatively easy. We forward the data we already have, and we're good to go. Downsides of this approach are that we create this route on the fly here in this anonymous method, and therefore if this application gets bigger and bigger and we have multiple such on-the-fly route creations, it can be hard to understand which different routes and screens our app has if we're new to this app, if we're a new developer. Named routes, which are all registered here in the main Dart file, are much easier to understand because there we have that routes table and we simply see which routes our app has. And that's simply easier than if we have to manually go through all the files to find all these on-the-fly route creations. Another downside is that, of course, it's convenient to pass the data we already have here to the product details screen, but what if we also need the price here, which we actually do need here? Then I also expect to get the price, and now all of a sudden we request some information, we need some information, which we don't have here in our product item widget. We don't have the price of the product here. Now, obviously, we could expect it here as an argument, and then we could pass it into the product item widget from inside our products overview widget, where we, of course, have all the products, including their price. The downside about this approach is that we then pass data into product item, which we don't directly use there, which we don't display there, which we only need because we want to create a new screen in here. We want to create that on-the-fly route in here. So we're in that scenario where we pass data as arguments, which we don't really need in the widget, but which we need in another widget where we want to forward it. And that's exactly what we typically want to avoid. So here we already see a problem with this approach. It would be nicer to have a named route, and therefore here in the product item, we could simply use push named and simply pass in the name of our route here. And therefore on the product detail screen, instead of getting this as arguments, I would rather extract that value here from my routing arguments, as you learned it in the navigation section. And for now, I don't have that, so that I can still compile. I'll turn this into some hard-coded text, just so that I don't get errors whilst this compiles. We'll turn this back into a dynamic title later. So instead of getting or having properties which we get as arguments in the constructor, it would be nicer to retrieve arguments from our routing action, so to say, and use this page here, this screen, this widget, as a named route. And therefore, we can, of course, have a static const route name or route path here, which could be product detail, so that we can use this in our main Dart file here in the route table. Because then here we can import from the screens folder the product detail screen Dart file, and then register this as a named route here. Use the product detail screen and there the route name, this static const, which is a string, as a key in this map. And then the value is this builder function where we get the context. We get that by Flutter when it calls the builder function when we call push named. And here we build the product detail screen. And now we have a clean way of seeing which routes we have. We have the overview screen and we have the detail screen. And now when we call push named here, we refer to the product detail screen route name, and now we can set some arguments. And the argument here should, of course, now not be an object or a map with the price, the title, and so on, because then we would still need all that data in the product item widget, which is exactly what I want to avoid. But instead, we could, for example, only forward the ID so that we can fetch all the data we need in the product detail widget inside of the product detail widget. So here in the product item widget, which is that grid item, there I only forward the ID here, which is a property which I do have. I forward that ID here to my named route, not all the data I need there. And now in that named route, I want to extract that ID, which we can do with modal route of context dot settings dot arguments. This will in the end give us the ID, because I forward the ID as my argument, as my only argument here. And now here, I want to get all my product data for that ID. And that, of course, won't work if we always pass data just through constructors. Instead, now we need a central state management solution.